Before we start this video, I want to take the opportunity to pay my respects to the family and the crew of the USS Scorpion SSN-589, which is forever on patrol. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, or I guess I should say Iron Bottom Sound Hobby Kids, but regardless, I'm here today with a 1/72nd scale USS Scorpion SSN-589 submarine model. The model in this video is built for my own personal collection, is not for sale and or purchase, and normally I would mention that I take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. Because this model here is a submarine, I don't really take on submarine commission builds, so this one here is just going to be basically a one-off. However, if anyone is interested in a model in my usual working subject matters and scales, I can be reached via the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. This model here is built predominantly out of the box. However, I went ahead and upgraded it past the kit original point, bringing it to the condition that we have here. I'll be going over all of these modifications and detail add-ons in this video, so stay tuned because there's going to be a bit of content coming right at you. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this model here is the USS Scorpion SSN-589 Fast Attack Submarine. The Scorpion was one of the Skipjack class nuclear attack submarines that were designed by the US Navy in the 1950s time frame. As I touched upon in other Skipjack class sub videos, the USS Skipjack was a very important and influential submarine design developed by the US Navy. Prior to this class of boats here, the boats that came out before, like the Gato, the Ballo, the Tench, and even the Nautilus for that matter, were more or less designed for surface running and can really trace their lineage to what John Holland did back in the 1900s. The Skipjack was the first to incorporate two technologies, a teardrop-shaped hull, which was developed from the USS Albacore, and also the nuclear power system from the USS Nautilus. Because of these two technologies, the submarine had excellent performance underwater and can operate for long durations of time. In total, 6 complement boats were built in the Skipjack class format, and they were built by two firms that generally built submarines for the US Navy. One was out in Mare Island, and the other is in Groton, Connecticut, which is Electric Boat Company. Electric Boat built the USS Scorpion, whose keel was laid down in the late 1950s. However, the boat was officially commissioned by the US Navy in 1960. The Scorpion saw service with the US Navy throughout the 1960s timeframe. Unfortunately, in 1968, tragedy did occur with the Scorpion. For one reason or another, the Navy isn't exactly very forthcoming on the true cause of what lost the Scorpion. However, what is known is that the Scorpion was attached to the Atlantic Fleet and was in operation in the Mediterranean area. At some point on the Scorpion's final patrol, it was near the Azore Islands, and this was where catastrophe struck with this boat. The submarine was lost with all hands on deck, and the submarine's wreckage still lies at the bottom of the ocean in that area to this day. As for the reasons why the submarine went down, well, there's several conflicting stories. The Navy claims that there was a problem with the torpedoes on board and one of them prematurely detonated inside the submarine, while other theories claim that the submarine wasn't exactly in tip-top condition prior to the submarine heading off on its final voyage. What is known, however, was that around the same time there was a loss of another U.S. nuclear submarine, which was the USS Thresher, and with the loss of both of these submarines, the Navy went ahead and thoroughly revised not only submarine design, but also the maintenance records for maintaining their boats. Since these two incidents, the U.S. Navy, at the time of filming this video anyhow, have yet to lose any other nuclear submarine. One other thing that's noteworthy about the Scorpion incident was that after the incident, the Navy also went ahead and took every one of the torpedoes that were on inventory, removed them out of service, and gave each and every one of them a retrofit. Again, since all of these changes and upgrades were instituted, the US Navy has had an excellent track record with their boats. One other thing about the Scorpion that is noteworthy is that in the 1980s, the US Navy hired oceanographer Bob Ballard to examine and document the wreck of both the Thresher and the USS Scorpion. Once Mr. Ballard finished his work for the Navy actually allowed him to basically take the equipment and find whatever shipwreck that he wants. The shipwreck that he went out and sought after was the RMS Titanic, which he found shortly after documenting the two wrecks that I just mentioned. Normally at this point in the video, I would say let's go ahead and take a step back to when the models first started, where I'll give the model a thorough in-box review. However, I'm not going to be really going over that in this video because this is really the third of the Moebius 1/72nd scale Skipjack kit videos that I've done so far, and so going over that information is really more or less redundant. If you do want to know more information about that, I recommend checking out the other two videos that I released previously about the same kit. As for the kit itself, well, the basic 9,000 foot view is that this is the 1/72nd scale USS Skipjack fast attack submarine kit from Moebius. The Moebius kit has been around now for about 10 years, and it's actually a really interesting model that was released by them, and it's one that I personally enjoy building, as this is again the third build that I've done from this exact same kit. What's cool about the Skipjack is that there are 6 boats that were made in total in the class, and obviously I'm going through the paces on fleshing out the entire class, so at some point I should be done making these videos. But for the time being, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was being worked on, because there are a few things that I did to this build that are different compared to the other ones that I've already done. So here's the model at the very start of the build, and on the Skipjack kits, like I've touched upon in the other Skipjack kit review videos, is that the hull on these kits are subdivided into 4 sections. We have a bow top, bow bottom, stern top, and stern bottom. The pieces plug together, and then the two halves marry up, giving you the cigar teardrop shaped hull, which is iconic for the Skipjack. One thing that I did want to touch upon, though, is that on a couple of the previous kits that I've built of the Moebius Skipjack, the fit on the bow section and the stern section left a little room for improvement, where it must have been with the way the pieces were molded, but it seemed like, or possibly with the way they were shipped, the stern sections were kind of smushed in a little bit, and because of that, when it came time for alignment of the top portion, the rear portion required a little bit more jigging in order to properly index it to the correct location. On this example over here, that's not the case. The pieces are actually perfectly shaped and sized, and this is going to really speed up the assembly. So after building 3 of these models now, I could say that this is something that's going to be the luck of the draw. So either you get one and it's going to require a little bit more fitting in order to get the hull sections together, or you're going to have one that fits pretty well. So it just seems like that's it's a coin cost on these Moebius kits. Having said that, of course, they go together very well. It's not like it's a deal breaker or anything, but it requires just slightly more clamping in order to get the piece to fit on, as opposed to something like this where you're going to need probably 2 less clamps. Regardless, the hull still goes together pretty well. For fans of the channel that have watched the USS Scam video, you'll know that when I built that model, I developed a few detail upgrade parts in order to enhance the Moebius kit a little further. Well, since I developed that set, I went ahead and took the idea and just basically ran with it, designing the set that we have here. This set here is the new Iron Bottom Sound HD 3D printed USS Scorpion detail accessory set. This set here, along with the other submarine sets that are available, are found on the link listed below in the video description, as well as you can see it right there on the bottom portion of the video. Just like with the last set, this one here is all-encompassing of 3D printed components, and the material used was HD material. The HD gives very nice and crisp details that are great for smaller scale models like this one here. Although the submarine is over 40 inches long, it is 1/72nd scale at the end of the day, so it is more or less on the smaller end. Specifically if you compare with the other models that I generally work on, but that's neither here nor there. Back to the set that we have here. This one here is designed to be a more thorough conversion set compared to the other one that I mentioned in the Scamp video, where in the Scamp version, we just have the 2 hatches for the front and aft bunkers, and we also have the nav lights, which are depicted in the open position that we have here. Those exact same components are found on this runner, and so if you are interested in upgrading your model, with this set over here, you don't need to add the other parts because there are one and the same. But where this set departs is where you can see the remainder of the components that are supplied. With this one here, I wanted to give some more extra external fittings that are absent on the Moebius kit for one reason or another. Some of the details, for instance, the cleats, as well as the rollers, are not present on the Moebius kit because the Moebius model depicts these components in the retracted state. One real cool feature about nuclear-powered submarines, specifically ones post-Skipjack, is that the hull fittings, when the vessel gets tied up to the dock, are retractable, and this was done to give less drag and to ensure that the vessel has greater underwater speed. However, one real cool attribute that I wanted to add to this particular build was to render this one with all of these details in the exposed state, giving it just for another unique version to model this submarine in. In addition to the cleats and the rollers, we also have the front and rear tie-downs, which is this large box-shaped object, and you'll see exactly how that fits and where it fits momentarily. Aside from just the external fittings for the tie-downs, I also went ahead and developed several other pieces that are more or less specific to what I saw on the USS Scorpion. That would include these two array options that we have here, as well as this rounded object that's present. There are also several other small little detail fittings that I saw while researching the USS Scorpion. In addition to the Scorpion-specific parts, another detail that we have here is a replacement snorkel induction system. I've touched upon this in both my Skipjack and in my Scamp video, but one of the weaker elements on the Moebius Skipjack, in my opinion, is the detailing present on the snorkel induction valve. And if you take a look at the kit one, which I will be comparing and contrasting it with this one over here once I remove it off the sprue, you could definitely see how the addition of this piece here will really add a huge improvement to the model as a whole. One other thing I do want to mention is that this set here is sold separately, so in case you just want to leave your Skipjack with the stock detailing, but you want to replace the standard induction, you can do that by just purchasing the snorkel induction piece and just replacing that one component on your model. The snorkel induction does have an option with beacons that are right here along the side, and from what I was able to tell from doing a bunch of research looking at these pictures high and low and on different boats no less, that there were two options for the beacon that's found on the top, which is called a Grimes beacon. And with this set here, you have the two options available. One interesting feature is that because this set is printed in the HD translucent material, the beacons are nicely replicated because you paint the undersides of them, and then when you glue them on, and if you don't paint the external areas, you actually have the translucent material act as a very realistic lens material. And this is something that I touched upon in the last video with the side navigation lights, and with this one here I took that idea and basically again carried it over. Aside from the Grimes beacons for the induction, we also have several other details that are intended to replace the stock Moebius ones. So two of which come to mind are again beacons. Here we have the beacon that is located on the rear tail fin, and that's just a simple white light beacon, and that is to basically signal that there's a tail fin in the water and to prevent someone from crashing into it. Because with the way these nuclear submarines are, you have the vessel, and then sticking out, in the water is the tail fin, and it's a good idea to have that beacon on it. The kit does have the beacon present, however, it's a bit soft in its overall detailing. With this one here, it definitely improves upon what the kit already gives you. The other beacon is this one that we have right over here, and this is meant to replace the other beacon that's found on the tower mast array. You're going to see exactly where it goes as the video progresses, but needless to say, the original one that's supplied with the kit is again very simplistic with its overall shape and detailing, and the addition of this piece here will definitely improve upon what the kit gives you. Another piece that's supplied with this set that was also present on the other set that I developed are the sirens. the Moebius Skipjack kit does have the siren detailing absent, and with this piece here, it just drops directly in place, giving you that missing detailing. Some other details that are also present here, like I touched upon before, are more or less for the Scorpion specifically, are these plates that we have right here on the side and these two on the front. These sections here are for the sail. There are several of these plated over caps that are present on the sail, and you'll definitely see that as the video goes on and when I start securing them in place. And these two on the front over here are actually on the nose and are adjacent of the arrays that we have right here. On the arrays themselves, like I stated before, you have two options available. This one here has its cover fitted, while this one here, the cover is absent, and we have the internal detailing that is present. The reason why I rendered both options is that when I was researching the Scorpion, originally the Submarine would have had this version over here. However, at some point, the top portion of what I assume is a fiberglass enclosure was lost, either out at sea or it was removed at a upgrade and was never remounted. And there are actually lots of photographs with the vessel with this type of configuration with the piece absent. In fact, if you look at the USS Scorpion wreck, this piece here is quite prominently seen in several of the official US Navy photographs. With the version with the cover section removed, you get to see the detailing that is present underneath. We have the little lip that runs along the outer portion here, and this is where the top cap would plug into place. We also have several fastener location holes found on the inner area, and what appears to be a beacon is what I believe is some sort of electronic sensor that is again used for whatever purpose this device is utilized for. This is the one portion that is not a beacon and is going to be painted along with the rest of the model, but again, you'll see exactly how that pans out as the video goes on. The last Scorpion detailing that I missed to touch upon is this dome that we have here. This is present on the front portion of the sail, and you'll see exactly where it goes as the video goes on. And on that note, one other thing I want to mention is that I went ahead and supplied more than enough components to outfit one submarine. This is because, well, you know, I am a modeler and I have had lots of mishaps along the years of parts snipping off or breaking off for one reason or other, or falling and going off the lost partia. And if that happens, you know, normally you're pretty much screwed. But for this model over here, or I should say this set here, I factored some redundancy in, so if any mishap happens along the way, you're not, you know, basically left pounding sand, and you do have some spares at your disposal. So now that you know what all of these pieces of equipment are for, let's go ahead and continue with the build of this model. So with the model undergoing construction, here you get to see some of the changes that are being made just prior to the upper and lower hulls being fit together. Note at this point here, the iron bottom sound escape trunk hatch has already been fitted to the bow as well as to the stern. The small little U-hook points that are integrally molded into the kit have been drilled out at this point with a pin vise. Little metal wire hooks are going to be added to these locations, but this is going to be done after the upper and lower hulls are conjoined. It's at this point, though, when the upper and lower hulls are still separate, is why you need to install these pieces at this time, because if I flip the model over, you can see how they get installed from underneath. Once the required material is removed, the IBSP simply just gets glued to the inside portion over here, leaving for the end result on the outside. The advantage about this set over here is that there's no guesswork required in leveling off the hatch. You just simply secure it on and the piece self-levels, making for the piece to be a nice, smooth installation every single time. However, I basically already mentioned that in the scam video. For the fans of this channel that watch these videos will definitely be able to tell you. However, for this one here, I went ahead and expanded the detailing as I touched upon earlier, and here you can see some of these details getting added at this point. This here is the rear tie down. This is the new IBS piece that I showcased before on the sprue, and here goes one of the other pieces removed. To install this component, you have to amputate the material that's molded in the section over here. Now for the one on the rear, it's really easy to do because this section is integrally molded into the kit, just as are the hatches are that I touched upon before. So basically, you just delete the material in the confines of that molded in line, and you have the appropriate cutout ready to go. Once the cutout is removed, you then install the piece. Unlike the hatches where these are self-leveling, for this one here, that's not exactly possible due to the curvature found on these areas over here. So once the piece is cut out, you have to manually fit the piece into place in a square manner. It's really easily done, and that's why I have all that material built up here on the bottom portion to give you sufficient meat in order to have the adhesive set and to adjust it accordingly until the piece is nice and squared away. For the one on the front, however, I'm going to have to do some more modifications. Unlike the one on the rear, the front tie down is not present, and we just have the small little tombstone shaped axis hatch that is integrally molded on. So because there's no clear-cut line that's engraved into this area over here, you are going to have to do a little guesswork on exactly where to place the front tie-down section. The same is also going to be true for that little half-rounded dome section that's present on the bow, and also, most importantly, that large acoustic device that I touched upon before on the runner. Fortunately, trying to find photographs of this area of the boat is very easily done, and there are some really good online sources out there that show the bow of the Scorpion in some pretty good detail. One other aspect of this build that I'm going to be revising is the propeller. The propeller you see here is the kit original 5-blade prop, and the prop that's supplied with the kit is actually very good. In fact, if anyone has seen the other two Skipjack build videos I've done, well, first, thank you for those, but also, you'll note that I utilized this prop on both of those builds. And the prop, for all intents and purposes, is just fine. However, one thing about the Skipjack class was that after, or I should say when they were first launched, all of them, all 6 of this class, seem to have had the 5-blade prop that we have here. The prop's design was very similar to other submarines of the era, namely the Guppy and the Fleet Snorkel converted fleet submarines. However, in the mid-1960s, the submarine force went ahead and wanted to upgrade all of their boats, or I should say all of their nuclear subs, to really have more of a quiet sound signature, and this was something that was going to be more important and was going to be more focused upon on the boats that came after the Skipjack. And one of the things that they redesigned was with the geometry of the propeller. The new redesigned propeller is this unit that we have right here. This unit is the revised 2nd generation shark fin propeller. It utilizes 7 blades as opposed to the old school 5-blade. And with this design, the submarine became much more quieter when listening in on sonar. This type of propeller was seen on the other boats that came after the Skipjack, like the Permit, the Sturgeons, the Los Angeles, so on and so forth. For this build, in order to properly render the Scorpion at its very last iteration, the propeller needed to have been revised. And the unit that we have here is a new 3D printed component from Iron Bottom Sound. The propeller is a single 3D printing, and the unit actually is designed to be a direct replacement for the original 5-blade prop. With the way the kit is, we have this little stem that emerges out with this little square section here, and this would mount onto a squared stub found on the inside of the boat. Well, the IBS one has the exact same type of feature found with the stem, and it's the exact same dimensions, so that the piece is a direct replacement. The unit is offered on the Iron Bottom Sound website in 2 configurations. We have this version here that has the external cone, and then there's another option that has the cone section removed. Why I went ahead and designed this version as well was because when I was researching this propeller, I encountered this picture of the Scamp. As you can see, the boat is in dry dock, and the dry dock is actually being flooded, so the revisions already have been made, and you'll see that the cone is clearly absent. Obviously, this image threw me for a bit of a curve because I needed to figure out if the Scorpion would have had the propeller with the cone or without the cone at the time of its final voyage. Well, fortunately, or again, unfortunately, the wreck of the Scorpion is still in existence, and there were several photographs taken of the propeller, and some of the images shows the propeller embedded into the sand in this type of a configuration. However, the sections of the cone are still visible through the sand. So for this model here, I'm going to utilize the coned version of the shark fin prop. The component itself is a single 3D printing, as I mentioned before, but unlike the other components which are made out of the HD resin material, this prop here is made out of my standard white nylon material that I use on many of my other 1/6 and 1/16 scale Model 10 components. And because of this, the propeller is very robust. It is pretty rugged. I'm not sure how it would adapt to radio control use, as this prop here was designed primarily as a direct replacement for the kit original plastic prop. So I am not sure how well this thing would perform under actual usage. However, for a static build like this one over here, the replacement of the propeller here is more than suffice. Along with the hull, I'm also assembling the sail at this time. If anyone has ever watched my USS Scamp video, I go in that video in more depth on how to assemble the sail, how to take care of the bodywork, things to watch out for, and also how to add extra details with the fastener locations. However, for the USS Scorpion here, or specifically this variant of the USS Scorpion, this here is going to be the groundwork for me to add extra detailing upon it. The first thing that I want to mention is with this area that we have right here. With the way the Moebius kit is made out, you have these 4 clear plastic window inserts that get inserted into these areas here on the top portion of the sail. And this is correct. All of the Skipjack class subs, Scorpion included, had this layout at one particular time, namely when the boats were first launched. However, as the boats continued in service, they got some extra refits, and small little fittings and more extra pieces of equipment were added upon the base platform. And this is the version of the Scorpion that I want to render. Not so much the early at-launch version, but the version how it looked really towards the end, just before it was tragically lost. Circling back to the windows, so one bit of equipment that was added to the Scorpion was a sonar dome, or some kind of an equipment dome located in this section over here, and this is found on the 3D printed IBS set. However, to install it, you need to first install on the windows. This is kind of funny because in both of those other videos, I mentioned that this bit of equipment here is the last one, or I should say one of the last bits of fittings that get added to the model at the tail end of the build. However, that is done because you want to protect the gloss clear plastic sections at all costs, just to prevent them from getting damaged. Well, for this one here, it's kind of the opposite. You need to plug these areas up here so you could modify it to add on the dome. And to do that, I use super glue, and I just super glue the windows in place. Obviously, with the clear plastic be damned. So once the windows are glued in place with some fine sandpaper, I wet sand this area over here, completely burnishing the clear plastic, making it no longer, well, crystal clear. This is done to blend in the seam work, but also to prepare it for later on when it gets its extra layers of paint applied to the surface. The scuffed up type clear plastics always hold paint so much better compared to just standard clear plastic painted over. From here, now that the glues are completely dry, the seam work is absolutely minimum. And by the way, you still want to have a slight seam in this area over here because the Navy themselves welded a patch in this area, and the small little seam work will lend itself to that bit of detailing. From this point on, I could actually take the Dremel, hog out, or I should say drill out this portion over here in the center, preparing it for the insertion of the IBS sonar dome. Same is also going to be true for the other bits of IBS equipment, such as the air horn, which is right here in the front, as well as all the other bits of equipment that are going to be scattered along the sides portion of the sail. Some of it's going to be found on the IBS set, while others are going to be extra scratch build parts made out of various materials, which we'll cut across to right now. And here's the submarine ready for painting. Just before it goes to the next step, I just wanted to take this moment to show what all of the, or I should say what a good number of the iron bottom sound components look like when fitted to the model at this point. Of course, there are going to be a few other fittings that are going to be added, but those get done after the model is painted, because these are things like the beacons and the navigational lights, which of course are done at the very tail end of the build, just to prevent them from getting oversprayed and overpainted. But you'll see more of that as the video goes on. Starting with the bow, here you can see the acoustic, or what I presume is some kind of acoustic equipment right here on the front. As I touched upon before, the set gives you two options. We have the version with the fiberglass cover fitted in place, and this version here with the section missing. Again, I wanted to render this boat as the Scorpion just before it was lost, and at that time, the equipment here would have been in this type of configuration. Directly back from the equipment takes us to the front tie-down point. You can see how it gets fitted in place. And then there's this other little dome type bit of equipment found directly next to it. Again, this was present on the Scorpion wreck that I was using for reference, and it's also seen on the IBS set. Directly ahead, or I should say behind all of those, is the front escape hatch. If anyone saw the last video on the USS Scamp, you'll know exactly what this component is for and why it's relevant to add to this model. And also you can see what the bow looks like with the other cleats fitted in place, and also the spool for the rope. Of course, this will come out in better light once everything is painted, but you get a rough idea on how it looks like once fitted to the model, and you can also see how much it improves and enhances the model compared to its sleek configuration that's found with the out-of-the-box offering. Moving further back takes us to the remainder of the rear hull equipment. Here you can see the cleats fitted in place along with their spool and also the rear escape trunk hatch. One thing that's really nice about the Moebius kit is that trying to insert these pieces to their locations requires no guesswork because the Moebius kit has all of these sections integrally molded on. One thing though that I recommend for installation is you need to drill a small little hole in the center of where the items go because of with the way the pieces are printed. There is a stem integrally molded into the bottoms of all these locations over here, and this was done for the printing procedure. However, when it comes time to remove them off of the sprue, I find that if you try to remove and amputate the stem completely, this can lead to breakage of the cleat because of the thin nature of the component. So rather than doing that, you leave the stem in place and you just use it as a mounting peg. Just drill a small little corresponding hole in the model and the piece just gets glued in place. This procedure actually makes the component much stronger, and it also makes the installation go by much easier. Towards the rear we have the other tie-down point. Again, this was touched upon earlier in the video, but now you get to see what it looks like fitted to the actual boat. Of course, the last thing to touch upon on the hull is with the shark blade propeller. The shark blade, as you can see, just fits directly into place as it would on the kit original. It's a little loose right now because obviously the piece is not glued on yet, but as the model gets painted and when it comes time for final installation, this will be able to be mounted to the model in a much stronger manner. However, you can already see on exactly how much this metamorphosizes the model compared to the kit original offering. Moving to the sail, you can see some of the other changes that were made both with the IBS set and also just other scratch build mods that I added to this model. The first is on the rear section over here. On the original Moebius kit, this area is hollowed out and you have these really cool ribs that are present in this area. And however, this was true for the Skipjack at launch. At some point, the Navy went ahead and revised it, removing that slit altogether. So on this model here, the slit was eliminated by gluing a strip of styrene strip in this area over here and then just blending it in via the bodywork. This will definitely be much more appreciated after the model is fully painted and everything blends in seamlessly. On a similar note, another area that was patched up by the Navy is this little section that we have right here. On the kit, there is this grill section integrally molded on, and the details are nicely rendered. Unfortunately for this era, the grill was patched over with a panel of metal, and on the model here, the grill needs to have been removed. Well, basically, I removed it the same way the Navy did. I just cut a panel out of thin aluminum and secured it to the two locations found on either side of the sail. On the top portion of the sail, one thing that's unique about not just Scorpion, but I also seen this on several other vessels of the Skipjack class, was that we had these straps just secured to the sides of the sail, and the same is true for the opposite side, and it's a slightly different format on the reverse side, which you'll see in a moment. However, to fabricate these sections, I went ahead and made these out of thin strips of aluminum that were carefully bent to the shape that you see here and mounted to these locations that I was able to figure out from several of the reference photographs of this boat. As for what they're for, honestly, I have absolutely no clue. I will say that the Skipjack, or I should say that the Scorpion had these basically at launch, and there were actually more of them at a certain point. At the very front of the sail, we have the addition of the IBS horn, along with the little guard that I've touched upon in a few other videos. The guard itself is just made from a thin piece of floor wire that was flattened and then glued into the location that you see here. The top bit of equipment was added since the previous scene, and as I mentioned before, once the clear windows are secured in place and polished over with the sandpaper, to adapt the sail to fit the IBS dome section with a Dremel with a router bit, you just simply carefully remove the material in this section over here, and once a sufficient amount of material is removed, the IBS piece just plugs directly into place. So here's the opposite side of the sail. As you can see, the clamp pattern or the strap pattern is very different compared to the one on the opposite side, and the pieces were assembled in the exact same manner as was the cover plate that I was referencing earlier. One other addition that's found on this side of the sail that's not present on the opposite side are these three HD 3D printed components. As for what they are for, honestly, I have no idea. The only thing I know is that they are found on the real sail, so obviously I'm going to fit them to this model here. The last bit of equipment to mention is the induction and snorkel section that we have over here. This is a complete replacement from the stock original unit, but you do recycle the bottom portion of the stock section. To do this, basically you glue the piece together with its halves as you would on the original model. Then once the halves are assembled and you polish away the seam work, you just then simply amputate the top portion and the new IBS one just drops directly into place. Here you can clearly see just how much more advanced the IBS one is compared to the kit original counterpart. Also, one thing that's interesting about the IBS piece is that you don't have to mount it in this position here. Because the piece is separate, you can simply just drill out the hole on the sail, and you can have the piece fitted in this place, which you can have the snorkel mounted in a slightly lower manner. This is a way to break up the monotony of the look of these skipjacks, as everyone, myself included, tends to build them with everything fully exposed like you see here. Of course, one last thing to mention about the snorkel is the Grimes light, which will be added in this area, but again, this will be touched upon after the model is fully painted. With the model complete, let's first start with discussing the stand. On a ship, the stand is actually one of the most important, yet often forgotten about and unsung parts of the entire build. The model can be awesome, however, if you have a crappy stand, it's going to lead to problems with both display and also it can cause damage to the model. On the Skipjack kit here from Moebius, the stand that comes with the model is relatively basic, to the point where I don't like using them. The stands are this plug-in type assembly, and although it does the job very well, at least for these unsightly holes on the bottom of the boat, and it's something that I personally don't like on my builds. So on all of my Moebius kits, I plug up those holes and I amputate them completely, blending them in with the remainder of the bottom hull details, or I should say the bottom hull surface. Because the kit stand is not going to be utilized, I have to use an alternative choice. The stand that you see here is actually a resin copy of the stands that are found on the 1/72nd scale Revell Gato class kit. The stand that comes on that model is actually excellent, and it's a really nice stand for just about most of the submarines that are out there, obviously the Skipjack included. The only thing that I made a mold of was the end connector here, and so I just cast two resin copies, and the center portions are just plugged together with PVC tubes, much along the lines as the kit original that is supplied with those models. With the stand assembled, it holds the submarine very, very well, and it cradles it equally as efficiently. The stand is also nice and low profile, which is great because it doesn't use up too much shelf space, and allows me to store the model and display the model without using up too much needed space. The only other thing that I frequently mention about these stands is you need some kind of a barrier between the stand and the model in order to prevent the hull from marring up. You have to be careful with this because some soft rubbery type insulators out there can actually cause harm to the model's paint finish if left on the surface for an extended period of time. So for this build and most of my other builds, I generally like to use just some blue painter's tape to protect these areas over here, which will reduce the marring found on the lower portion of the hull, and it also, most importantly, has no effect with causing the paint on the model to have any sort of negative chemical reaction. Moving up from the stand takes us to the lower portion of the hull with the lower hull details. This is something that is left completely stock out of the box, as the Moebius kit actually does a really good job with these details. You can see all of the floodgate detailings present on this model over here, as well as also, I believe, an access hatch here to the reactor compartment. Another bit of detailing that's present is the anchor, which is something that I like the way it was rendered by the Moebius kit. In order to really bring out the extra details on it, I went ahead and weathered it in the following configuration, having a lot of chipping. Keep in mind, this thing, the only sole purpose is for it to be dumped and dropped onto the ocean seabed, and where it gets dragged quite often. So you do want to weather this area quite a bit compared to the remainder of the hull. Aside from this area here, there's a lot of engraved panel lines outside of the gates. Like you see here, the lower portion of the sonar assembly. There are torpedo doors present, as well as a few other access panels. These are really nicely molded in, and so to really make them pop with some panel line accent, you could go ahead and add it to these areas over here, which will really make them pop compared to just having the pieces without any sort of accent coloring added to them whatsoever. On the floodgates, again, I really like the way they are rendered, but one thing to keep in mind specifically, if anyone out there is looking to RC their boats, is that these are just solid plastic and there's no flooding going on in these sections over here. If you are going to model the submarine to be radio controlled, you are going to have to drill these areas out, and you are going to lose these really nice details. I'm pretty sure there may be an aftermarket source out there or something in photo etch that gives you the look that you see here. However, this is something that I really don't know of, since I'm not making these models radio controlled. But it is definitely something to consider if you are going with that type of route. Also, while on the lower hull appendages, you can see the access panels in these two locations, and it's a mirror image on the opposite side. These are nicely rendered because they are made out of photo etch and are kit supplied. The pieces just get secured to the side of the model in the configuration that we have here. One little trick I recommend though is adding a slight little bend to the photo etch in order for it to match the curvature found on the hull. The pieces being photo etch, of course, are flat, and if you just try to glue the flat section onto the hull, it's going to fit, but it's going to be a little too flat and it may stick out. By adding a slight little curvature to the piece, it'll really blend in with the remainder of the sub's curvature, and overall it will really enhance the look in general. Moving to the aft end of the model, you get to see the iron bottom sound components now in their final form. Starting with the prop, of course, this is the iron bottom sound shark blade propeller set. This is a drop-in replacement for the stock kit supply piece, and once fitted in place, you really get to see how much it changes the model compared to its kit original condition. The prop was simply painted and weathered to the condition that we have here, and then was mounted to the appropriate location. Since the piece replaces the kit original one, it still has the exact same function that was supplied with the original kit, with the ability for the propeller to be spun. Directly in front of the propeller, we have these segments here of what on the real boat would be zinc plates. The zinc plates are found on all of these boats because they mitigate corrosion in these locations. There are several other zinc plates found on the boat, but they're generally mounted on the inside. It's only on the aft area over here where the zinc plates are exposed to the exterior portion of the boat. These are the kit original components and are excellently molded. The only thing you have to do is appropriately paint and weather them, and then just secure them into their allocated locations. Once done, they really give the model a nice little bit of color, and they also give some very nice detailing. Something else to mention about this area of the model is that the stern planes, as well as the rudders, are fully functional and can pivot. A lot of individuals like to RC these boats, and this is one aspect of the build that really lends itself to that, although this is a little bit more difficult than one might imagine. However, I'll leave that to the RC subchannels to go over in more depth. However, one thing to point out if you're building the model static is that you want to put a little bit of white glue on the pivoting points here, or you just want to maybe focus when you're painting it to build up some extra layers of paint in these locations, because what can happen is the pieces will just droop on you like the way you see it there, because gravity is a thing, and it's something that can possibly lead to a little bit of annoyance. But if you use a little bit of white glue and a few layers of paint, this should mitigate that quite a bit. Moving up takes us to the top portion of the rudder, and here you can see what the piece looks like fully completed. Of course, the rudder is the kit original component, however, has been slightly tweaked from the kit original. The kit original does have the indicator beacon detailing present in that location, and the indicator is something that's really important on these boats because the rudder here just juts out of the water, and anyone can potentially smash into it with a boat if they do not know it is there. The beacon itself is a replacement HD 3D printed component from Iron Bottom Sound, as I may have touched upon before. But one thing that's nice is that because this unit here is made from a translucent material, it does lend itself to be more accurate compared to the kit original. The kit original piece is just this lump of plastic molded into this section over here, and it does the job, but it does leave room for improvement. The kit one, again, is made out of opaque plastic, and trying to make something opaque render something that's clear is something that leaves, again, room for improvement. Also, the geometry of the piece is a little bit on the softer side compared to the one on the IBS set, which more or less mimics the geometry found on the real beacon. The beacon is a really simple piece to add. You file away the original dome, add a small little pinhole where the piece was originally, and then the IBS one just drops directly in place. The IBS one, the bottom portion is actually painted in silver, and then I go ahead and paint the rim here flat black, as that matches the color here on the remainder of the submarine. Of course, on the real unit, there would be a glass dome on top of a mount, and that mount would be attached to the boat, and that would be black. Once you go ahead and paint the component accordingly, it really does enhance the look of the component and the model overall, as opposed to just using the kit original piece. Also in this section over here, you can see the paintwork done to the tail fin itself. Now I am jumping ahead a little bit because I am going to be going over the measure on this model towards the latter half of the video. However, one thing that's interesting I found about Scorpion, this is the only one of the Skipjack classes that actually had the rudder painted in this format, or at least there's photographic proof of the rudder painted in this format, is you can see that the top portion of here has the measure that's continued. On the other boats, basically the measure is only found on the top sections of the sail, while the tail here is just left in overall all black, or sometimes you'll see it with the waterline with it will be red below. On the Scorpion, specifically towards the end of its service life, or I should say just before it went out on its final patrol, the rudder was in this condition that we have here, and there is photographic proof of that, which I will throw pictures up on screen now. Not to mention, there are several images of the wreck where you can clearly see the rudder here in this configuration. On that note, the markings that are present here are the kit original water slide decals, and again, they are in a slightly different location compared to the other boats that I've built before. Some of the other boats have these markings towards the center of the fin, others a little bit towards the front, and then another one here has it towards the rear. There are several options on how to put the markings on the sail, and the way, or I should say on the fin, and the way you see here again is as per the real boat. Of course, one of the biggest things to point out about the build is the bodywork. Bodywork is pretty much what is the majority work on this build in general. As I touched upon before, the hull comes into 4 pieces, and so not only are you going to have a seam line to contend with on where the two halves meet, but you're also going to have a seam line to contend with where the two upper and lower sections conjoin. And to add upon that, as I touched upon in the other videos, the Moebius Skipjack has this integrally molded in line found at the waterline section, and this is something that does detract slightly from the look of the build, and it's one that I personally like to delete when I take on one of these builds for myself. With all the bodywork polished away, it leaves for a seamless appearance that we have here, and it's one that definitely improves the look of the model tenfold. Also, like I touched upon before, this one here, this particular example, the hulls fit together very well. So unlike the other examples of the Skipjack where I built, where they did require a little bit more effort in terms of finessing the parts to get them to fit, and also with the bodywork required to blend everything in, this example here went together with much less effort. So here you get to see what they look like, again, fully painted and weathered in this configuration. The cleats, again, just really do give a bunch of extra detail to this area here, as well as the front section of the model. And along those lines, you also get to see the escape trunk hatch detailing present as well. Of course, another thing that's present on the escape trunk are the 4 little lift rings that we have here. And like I may have mentioned before, the Moebius kit does have the indications for these hooks present in the plastic moldings. The only thing the builder needs to do is drill these out with a pin vise and fabricate his own little hooks out of some pieces of floor wire. Once that's completed, you really get some extra detailing without a whole lot of effort, and it's again something that helps the build overall. While on that note, let's periodically skip over the sail and jump to the bow of the model, and you get to see the remainder of the IBS details, again, in better light. This would include the cleats, the roller, as well as that other thing that, again, I'm a tank guy, so don't nail me to the cross on this one. I'm not really sure what this thing is called, but I do know it has to do with guiding ropes through this section over here. Also on this location, you get to see what the hydrophone looks like without that plastic dome, or I should say it's a fiberglass dome that is present. And again, this is what it looked like on the Scorpion just before it was lost. As I may have touched upon before, the top section of this bit of equipment is painted in white, or I should say it's white in all the photographs and even on the wreck. So here you get to see what it looks like fully painted on this example. While on the topic of painting objects, on the roller, and this is also true for the one in the rear, I went ahead and weathered it by painting the midsection here in silver, because the paint would rub off on these sections very, very quickly, as obviously this is what you would use to loop rope around, and this thing is basically nothing more than a winch, so obviously the paint in these areas here would rub off in a short amount of time. Also, while on this area, you get to see the marker buoy detailing, which of course is that little eyelet that I may or may not have touched upon before. All of the skipjacks had this little bit of detailing present, and it's one that's really easily added by the builder. You just drill a small little hole into the section over here with a pin vise and just bend a small little eyelet out of some thin floor wire. Once that detailing is done, just glue it to the appropriate location and you're good to go, and the model is improved by that. Also, while on the hull, you get to see that I drilled out several of these perforations that are found on the kit's tooling. However, they are molded somewhat shallow. On my last build, I found that by drilling them out, it's a great way to enhance the model. I'm not really sure what they are or what they do, but I'm pretty sure that they are an actual hole or some kind of a vent cover of some sort or another. So by drilling them out, it's a way to add a little bit more extra detailing to the build, but again, without having to do a whole lot of extra modifications. Also on that note, just like on my other skipjack models, I went ahead and added the small little recessed fastener locations found on all of these access hatches that are present on not just the hull, but also on the conning or on the sail specifically. This is done with a pin vise, and I just go ahead and add the holes to these various locations, again giving the model that much more extra detailing. So jumping up to the sail, as I touched upon earlier, the groove that was found in this section here was completely blended over with some styrene and a little bit of bodywork. And now that the model's fully completed, you get to appreciate the bodywork that was done, leading for a seamless appearance that we have here. Aside from the slits, something else that I always mention on these skipjack builds, and something I highly recommend, is to drill out the limber holes that are found on the top portion here. These limber holes are present on the Moebius kit, but they're just small little indentations, more or less acting like suggestion points. In order to drill them out, a small Dremel bit on a pin vise is more than suffice, and once done, it really does improve the model, giving it that much extra polish. The limber hole locations are nice that they indicate them for you, so there's no guesswork required. You simply just go over the little sections and the piece looks much better when done. Moving forward takes us to the remainder of the sail, and you get to really appreciate those other details that I touched upon before now that the model is fully painted. Starting with these locations that we have here, as I mentioned before, there are these straps that are present on the side portion of the sail. However, one thing that was interesting was that on the photographs of the Scorpion before it departed from its final voyage, and also on several photographs of the wreckage, you do get to see this distinctive paintwork present on these locations over here. What appears to me is that these look like areas that were touched up by the crew at an ad hoc refit that was true for the Scorpion just prior to it going and setting out to sea. The paint didn't exactly match, and if you look at the photographs, you will clearly see that these areas here are in a lighter gray compared to the remainder of the paintwork found on the rest of the sail. This is, by the way, a mirror image found on the opposite side of the model. And fortunately, there are several photographs from both sides of the Scorpion, so you can really get to see exactly what the exact repaint patterns were on the various locations. While on the topic of added details, you could also see the addition of the side navigation beacons now that the model's fully completed. I touched upon these earlier on in the video. However, these are something that I always add at the very end of the build because obviously you don't want to get any overspray paint on these sections over here, and these units are best painted via a paintbrush just prior to final installation. The pieces, once painted, they just simply get glued to the appropriate areas, which again are kindly laid out as they are engraved into the side portion here of the Moebius sail. One thing to mention on the beacons is you do have to be aware on which side's port and which side is starboard, because this definitely comes into play on how the beacons get painted. On this side here of the model, they are in green, while on the opposite side, they are in red. And this is one advantage, again, of the translucent material that the HD 3D printed parts are made in, is that when you're painting beacons, you really get this nice realistic look to it because of the material being that translucent color, or that translucent material, I should say. The best way to paint them, I found, and this is also, again, mentioned briefly on the other beacon that I touched upon, and also the same is going to be true for the top beacon that you'll see in a moment, but the best way to do is that before the piece is actually painted, you paint the side portions the color of the beacon, in this case green. So you paint the back green and you paint this side here green too. Once the paint fully sets and dries, you then go ahead and paint it with the appropriate colors, such as on the top here and the bottom it's black, along with the little guard and even the little threaded rods which hold everything together, which are again found on the printing. So with a very, very careful thin paintbrush, you can go ahead and paint those accordingly. And on the rear door section over here, you can see that I painted it with the same color as the remainder of the sail, again as per the real unit. Once the paint fully sets and dries and you install the piece to the boat, hopefully this comes out in the lighting situation that I have here, but it definitely has a very nice realistic look to it, as opposed to just painting an opaque piece of material with the lens on the outside. So that's again one thing to consider if you're working on one of these models and you get the IBS set. Also here on the front, you get to appreciate the other detail that I talked about before with that bit of equipment found right there on the top portion of the sail. And you can also see at this point that the clear window has been applied to the lower section of the sail viewpoint, I guess, which would be an apt way to describe it. If any Navy person out there knows the exact term for this, feel free to put that in the comment section below. But the Moebius kit again has these pieces made in injection molded clear plastic, and they do look very nice once properly installed. To install it, like I always mention, I use white glue for the installation because it dries very clear, and in case there's a mishap with the installation, you could pop it off, clean the piece off, and there's no detrimental effect to the clear plastic as there would be if you use something like a cement or a super glue. Once the glue's set, the piece is all ready to go. However, one thing of course to keep in mind is that if you are building the models radio controlled, you definitely want to use a different type of glue, because obviously white glue is water soluble, but they do have white glues that are out there that are waterproof, and I have seen them used on other boats in the past, and they do hold up actually remarkably quite well. So that is, again, something else to consider. Also on this area over here, you get to see the siren, again fully painted with that brush guard. Well, on a tank it would be considered a brush guard, but there is some kind of a guard found here on the Scorpion. Again, it's just a little thin piece of floor wire that was flattened, glued in place, and it gives a little bit of extra detailing to the piece overall. Moving up takes us to the array, which is one of the main focal points on all submarines, but on a nuclear boat it's even more important because, generally speaking, there's not really a whole lot going on with the remainder of the hull. So starting with the scopes and the mass, all of these are the kit supplied units and were simply mounted as is, as I've mentioned in a few other videos. They are a two-piece assembly, so there is some slight seam work to contend with, but nothing that is overly egregious, and after a few swipes of some sandpaper and a little bit of super glue, the job is basically done. On the camouflage, you will see that on this model here, the little camo is actually painted on via paintbrush, and again, this is true to form to the real USS Scorpion. As I've touched upon in a few videos, you do have some options available on how to render these. Some of them have the little camouflage squiggles painted with a paintbrush, others they were painted with a spray gun. It really just depends on when and where the modification, or I should say the maintenance, was done on these scopes, where they went ahead and repainted them. So as for which one works for you, that depends on really your personal taste, and also which version of the boat and when the boat was being used is the one you want to render. As for the parts that were replaced, we'll start here with the beacon. The beacon that we have here is modified from the kit original. The kit original does supply you with this beacon, however, it's rather overly simplistic in its overall shape. The one that you see here is the replacement piece from Iron Bottom Sound, and again, because it's made out of that HD 3D printed material, it does lend itself for better accuracy compared to the opaque plastic one found on the kit original. To mount the IBS one in place, you actually use the kit original stem. You just simply snip off the dome light with a clipper, and then the IBS one just gets dropped into place. The IBS one in comparison does have better geometry on the overall piece, as well as also on the bottom base, which again, these details are, if not soft, or just straight up missing on the kit original. Just like with the side beacons, they do have a very nice realistic glow to them once you paint them in the condition I mentioned before. And for this light here, orange paint was utilized, and hopefully with this lighting and hopefully with the camera staying in focus, you really get to appreciate the color of the translucent material, which again gives it for a very nice realistic appearance. From the beacon takes to the two periscopes, and again, another bit of detailing that is mentioned on my videos that is not something that you see mentioned on many other YouTube channels out there, is with the color of the periscope shrouds. This is again something I've seen on many of the real boats, and on the Skipjack here it would definitely be relevant. On this scope here, the tube is just bright shiny chrome type silver. However, this version of the periscope, the silver is this really dull looking color. For this one over here, I took Vallejo silver, added a few drops of flat black to it, giving you for the appearance that we have here, and once done, it definitely makes the periscope stand out compared to just painting everything in silver. And again, it's also a way to get a little bit more extra accuracy out of your build. Of course, the last thing to mention on the array is the snorkel induction. This is, of course, the biggest focal point on the array in my opinion, and it's one that when replaced, it really does improve the look of the model overall. So much so that I'm going to be upgrading the other models that I've built with the same exact upgrade, but more on that later. As for the induction, you can see what it looks like fully painted and weathered, and it just really does improve this area immensely. So from there, this takes us to the paint and the markings. Starting with the markings, you'll notice that there really aren't any on this example, and this is true to form to the Scorpion. That was the version I wanted to render. At this point here, the only markings that were present were the numbers on the rear tail fin that I touched upon before, and those were the kit supply water slide decals and went on without any problems. However, the numbers on the sail, as well as also the name that's generally on this portion here of the sub, are omitted from this particular example for, well, one reason or another. The paintwork, again, is one of a measure, and what's interesting about the Scorpion is that the measure found is very different compared to the ones on the other Skipjacks, or specifically the known photographs of these vessels. Generally, these boats, when they have a measure, it's in a bluish type coloring, which was mentioned in my other Skipjack build videos. However, for the Scorpion, it's a primer gray used for the measure. And although the Scorpion is the only one known to be photographed in this configuration, it is important to point out that there are photographs of these boats prior to being built. They had a big wooden model of them made, and this desktop model has this exact camouflage pattern on. In fact, I'll roll a picture up on the screen. Not only is the sail painted in much longer configuration that you see here, but even the tail fin, which again was something that was unique to the Scorpion, as I touched upon earlier. Something else I wanted to mention about the paintwork involves the lower hull. There is not really much known about the paintwork on the lower hull, if it's all black or if it's with a low red line like you see here. From what I can see from images of the wreck, and also from just general guesstimation on these boats, I believe, in my opinion, that the boat would have had a low red hull along the lines you see on this model here. As for actual paintwork, well, luckily, like I've mentioned in the other videos, painting submarines is actually quite very simple. The black you see here is nothing more than El Cheapo flat black spray paint, and the red is nothing more than Ace brand red primer. Everything is spray painted on. Of course, masking tape is utilized to just, separate the colors like you see here. The biggest difference on this one compared to the other ones, of course, again, ties back to the measure found on the sail. The gray At one point in time, you could have gotten a can of equipment gray primer spray paint from any home improvement store, and even Walmart used to sell them for a time. The Walmart color is actually really good. Unfortunately, the Walmart brand no longer makes that paint, and that shade is basically gone. You could probably make do with Rust-Oleum or a Krylon base, but trying to apply it precisely is not exactly that easily done with a can of spray paint. So for this one here, I went with my own mix where I took Tamiya acrylic Kerr gray and I added white to it, flat white, in order to lighten it up to the color that you see here of the primer gray found on this model. The paint diluted and lightened up very, very easily, and once it was at that point, I was able to airbrush it onto the various locations. As for the literal touch-ups that I touched upon before, these were applied via a thin paintbrush, much along the lines as they were applied on the real boat. So in order to get that extra realism, I went ahead and mimicked that type of paint application. For the weathering, I went with my usual format with washes and filters, lightening up the black, making it look like it was a bit sun-faded. And for the areas below the waterline, I really wanted to make this one more weathered compared to the other examples that I've built in the past. Because the Scorpion was documented that it was a bit overdue on its dry docking, it would have much more marine growth found on the lower extremities compared to some of the other boats. And even in images of the wreck, you can see this, where below the waterline, you can actually see the clear waterline because below it, it's all gunk and algae. So I wanted to replicate that as much as possible on this example here. Of course, the boat was in Italy or in the Mediterranean for a while, so you are going to have much more greener marine growth as opposed to somewhere in the northern hemisphere because of the climate of the, or the temperature, I should say, of the water, and that does affect the type of algae that grows up there. So for this one here, I went ahead and actually airbrushed several shades or filters of green on the lower extremities, as well as with some browns, in order to get the look that we see here. And then for the waterline, this was done with a few different colors and was applied via the paintbrush. I used a fan brush to apply the white chalk line, and then, or I should say the white salt line, and then I used a different type of paintbrush with the greens in order to give you the marine growth blanket found in this area over here. Once the weathering was completed, I went ahead and thoroughly painted, or I should say coated the model with the VMS matte varnish, giving it for the look that is present here. The VMS matte varnish, I really like the way it seals up everything. It protects the paintwork from just handling, and also if the model gets dusty, I can wipe it off with a brush or wash it off, and the VMS does protect the paint underneath. On top of that, I just like the way the models look after the coat of varnish. It just does something to them where it just makes them look all that much more polished compared to just leaving them in the el natural state. And while on the topic of paintwork, I might as well get the other two examples that I've built in the video for a nice group photo. As I've mentioned before, there's this common misconception that nuclear subs are very boring and you're very limited to your color selection. Well, clearly that's just not the case. There are lots of different options out there on all of these boats, and there really is a lot of variations out there for the builder to enjoy. So far, you can see that I've got 3 of the 6, so we're literally halfway there. And that's just with the paintwork and not including the other detail modifications that I've already touched upon in this video, like the later design of the propeller, as well as even the other cleat details that I referenced earlier. So basically we've come to the end portion of the video, and generally at this point I would go ahead and give my skill level and recommendations. However, I basically again did that in great length in the other Skipjack videos. Needless to say, if you are a fan of US submarines, this kit here is extremely recommended. If you're also a fan of RC converting model submarines, obviously this one here should be on your radar. Pun intended. The model itself is a very nice size and builds extremely well. Some people out there have had some comments that were discouraging on these kits, saying that the kits were pretty bad. However, that's not really my opinion on them. I think they're fantastic and build very well with not really a whole lot of effort. So if you're looking for something that is interesting and is actually a very nice size, this kit here is highly recommended. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for the 1/72nd scale USS Scorpion SSN-589 fast attack submarine. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have photographs of not just this boat over here, but the other two submarines that are in the background, not to mention all of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been shown on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale tank detail components, as well as don't forget to swing by Iron Bottom Sound for the 3D printed detail upgrade parts that were used on this model over here. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.